SEC opener tomorrow, Texas, Mississippi State. We discuss on today's episode of Locked on Longhorns.
You are Locked on Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked on Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked on Longhorns, Texas versus Mississippi State. Some interesting matchups on both sides that could determine this game. Texas favored by 37.5. I think they'll be just fine, but once again, you got to go out and play the game. So interesting matchups on both sides that could determine this game. In the second segment, SEC power rankings. Gordy decided to get a little spicy, right? Chris Gordy from Locked On SEC decided to get a little spicy. Now, I'm not going to react to it to the second segment. I'm going to go ahead and show y'all right now. Tennessee at number 1 after beating Oklahoma over Texas. Are you kidding me? Like I said, I'm going to save it for the second segment, but, I'm going to go off a little bit. I don't know what Gordy got going on, but that's what you get for beating the corpse of Oklahoma is number 1 over Texas in the power rankings. Get out of here. And then in the last segment, my 5 somewhat bold predictions. I'm hedging it a little bit somewhat bold because they weren't that bold the last time I did. My 5 somewhat bold predictions for the SEC opener against Mississippi State tomorrow in DKR. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked on Longhorns, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. So once again, like I said, Texas opens up in the SEC, the moment we've all been waiting for. Probably wish it was against a better opponent, but, hey, you got to play who's in front of you. And Texas will be facing off against Mississippi State, which seems like the consensus worst team in the SEC right now. The spread is currently set at minus 37.5. And I'm trying to think of when is the last time a SEC matchup, right, or SEC team was a 37.5 point underdog not named Vanderbilt, right? Like I need a historian. I need Gordy. I need somebody to come on and tell me when the last time a non-Vanderbilt named SEC team was a 37.5 point underdog. But nonetheless, that's the reality for the Texas Longhorns and the Mississippi State Bulldogs tomorrow. And all I'm asking from the crowd is, can we get that sarcastic SEC chant going, right? Like when Texas gets to whooping up on Mississippi State and the game is out of hand and we just start to say, this is what the SEC had to offer. This is what y'all told us we should be afraid of. I just hope, I know the student section will, right? I know the student section got me. I hope somebody in DKR, after we start whooping up on Mississippi State, just starts to say, SEC, 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 SEC. All right, so it should be a good game tomorrow. Should be a good, SEC opener for the fans, and DKR will be rocking for sure. Texas favored by 37.5. If they don't cover it, I think they come close. I think they're going to beat up on Mississippi State pretty bad, but you still got to line up and play the game. Stranger things have happened. We know this Texas team is going to come out firing, but like I said, you still got to play the game. So when you look at it, there's a few things that Mississippi State does well, right? It's not a lot, you know what I mean? But there's a few things that Mississippi State does well. When you look at it, when I'm looking at this passing offense for Mississippi State, currently 36th in passing offense in terms of yards per game in the country, but they're only 65th in attempts per game, right? So that's pretty efficient. If you're only 65th in attempts per game, but you're getting the 36th most yards in the country, it's not elite, but it's still, pretty squarely in the top half of the country. That's pretty efficient. And they're 28th in yards per attempt, right? So they can get some explosive plays in the passing game. And we've seen through the first 4 weeks, our passing defense has been elite, but it hasn't necessarily been tested. When you look at, Colorado State, ULM, UTSA, and then, Davis Warren at Michigan, who was ultimately benched for Alex Orji, they haven't played a great passing offense thus far. Now, they won't play a great passing offense on Saturday, but this is a passing offense that certainly can make some plays. When you look at it through the first 4 games, even though they're 1-3, this Mississippi State offense has 4 plays of 40-plus yards in the passing game. I'm going to say that again. 4 plays of 40-plus yards in the passing game. Now, Texas hasn't given up any 40-yard plays in the passing game thus far. So something has to give, right? Does this elite Texas pass defense come out and shut them down? Or does Mississippi State continue to make big plays in the passing game? Now, of course, the caveat to that is Blake Shapen, their starting quarterback, is now injured. And all 4 of those 40-plus yard passing plays and essentially all of their passing production has come with him at quarterback. But now he's out for the season. And so true freshman Michael Van Buren came in their last game, 7 for 13 for 100 yards. 28 yards was his longest pass, right? And so obviously true freshman, you expect him to struggle. But Jeff Lebby calling the plays, obviously he's haunted Texas before last year in the regular season in the Red River rivalry. This is an offense that could generate some long passing plays, some explosive passing plays. And so it's going to come down to, who can win that matchup, this elite Texas defense or this Mississippi State passing offense. Because they're on their backup, a true freshman, I expect this passing defense for Texas to win that matchup. Another thing that Mississippi State does well is their third down conversion rate, right? One of the best in the country, 39th in the country, not elite, but still squarely in the top half. 45% conversion rate on third down, which is really good. But when you look at this Texas defense, 4th in the country, only allowing 22% of third downs to be converted. So that's something else I'm going to be watching. When Texas ultimately gets this Mississippi State offense to third down, can they get them off the field, stall drives, and create more opportunities for the offense? They should be able to do that. Like I said, Texas only allowing 22% conversion rate, but Mississippi State converting at a 45% clip. That's going to be an interesting matchup in this game tomorrow. Now, where Texans can take advantage of Mississippi State, trust me, in a lot of ways, but a few that I wrote down. Mississippi State is allowing 217 rushing yards per game at a 4.9 yard per carry clip, right? So we saw last week, Texas really got the running game going, right? Jaden Blue came back off an injury, 25 carries, just a workhorse type performance, 120 yards and 4 touchdowns. I mean, Colin Page had 60 yards, Jared Gibson, had like 30, 35 yards, whatever it was. Now, when you look at the running back room, Vilton Gardner's not going to be able to play. Colin Page is doubtful. All right. Trey Wisner is questionable. I'm not sure how many touches he's going to get, if he's even going to be able to play. But I think this is going to be another workhorse-like performance, especially if, Arch Manning is the starter. Quinn Ewers listed as questionable. Steve Sarkisian is going to want to go in there and run the ball at a very high clip, right? And so I see Jaden Blue getting another 20 to 25 carries. I see Jared Gibson getting a bunch of carries, and Texas probably running the ball 40-plus times. And this is the defense you want to do it against. Once again, allowing 217 yards per game in terms of rushing at a 4.93 yards per carry clip. I expect Texas to run the ball early and often and run it very well against Mississippi State. And then when you look in the red zone, right? Obviously, we know that Texas is probably going to be able to move up and down the field. But when you get into that red area, when you get into the 20, will you be able to convert those opportunities? And this is going to be a really good game, a really good matchup for Texas in that regard. When you look at it, Mississippi State has allowed 13 touchdowns in 17 defensive red zone attempts, right? 13 out of 17 red zone attempts have resulted in touchdowns against the Mississippi State defense. Not great, right, for them. That means when you get down there in the 20, you're more than likely going to punch it in the end zone against Mississippi State. And then when you look at this Texas offense, right, we remember in the past, this was an offense that struggled in the red zone, right? Last year, we were in the 100s. That's not the case this year, right? Steve Sarkisian has dialed it up. This offense has dialed it up just a little bit. Texas has scored 21 touchdowns in 23 offensive red zone attempts for a 91% clip, right? When they get down there in the 20s, they punch it in the end zone. Mississippi State is also allowing 417 yards per game. So not only will Texas be able to move the ball up and down the field on this Mississippi State offense, if they get in the 20s, statistically, based on what Texas has done and what the Mississippi State has not done, right? or not been able to do in the red area, Texas should be able to punch it in and get touchdowns and not field goals. So those are just 4 matchups that could be interested in this game. Like I said, Vegas, they think it's a 37.5-point game. That's the spread. Everybody thinks that, Mississippi State is probably the worst team in the conference, a conference that includes Vanderbilt. But Vanderbilt's playing some pretty good football, almost, knocked off Missouri, a top 10 team in the country. So I think Texas, whoops up on them early and often. They run the score up early. And I think, it's always hard to predict, if a team will win by 37.5 points, right? But I do know Texas will win big. They'll win by at least 30, and they'll probably put a 40 burger on them the way that this team is playing. So SEC opener tomorrow, big game in DKR. And like I said, once we get up, 30, 35 points, I want to see the student section shouting SEC, 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 SEC. A quick word from our sponsors. And then I get into Locked On SEC Power Rankings. Chris Gordy, Tennessee over Texas, the number 1 team in the country, because they beat OU. Yeah, we got to talk about that one. Right, quick word from our sponsors, then we get into that next after the break. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. So sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. All right, so before I get into this, just a disclaimer, if I have to say it, I respect the hell out of Gordy. You know what I mean? Super cool, host of Locked On SEC, knows a ton of football, expert at what he does. This is just banter. This is strictly just banter and me reacting to his Locked On SEC power rankings. This is nothing against Chris Gordy personally. Probably don't have to say that, but it's 2024. I have to say that, all right? And so obviously Tennessee got a big win, against Oklahoma. Even though this isn't the Oklahoma team we're used to seeing, it's still tough to go on the road and beat a program like that. And it's an all SEC matchup. So, kudos to Tennessee. But Texas is the number one team in the country. In my opinion, I could be wrong. We still got 8 games to figure this out. Texas has looked like the best team in the country through the first 4 games. To me, if you're going to knock Texas off the number one spot, it has to be for good reason. And the good reason can't be because Tennessee went and beat the corpse of Oklahoma. So if you're listening on audio, you're just going to have to take my word for it. If you're watching on YouTube, I am now putting this up on the screen for you to view while I go through this week's Locked On SEC Power Ranking. So you can see it on the screen. And I just have to question, why is Tennessee number one? Once again, because they beat the corpse of Oklahoma. A team that has not had a 200-yard passer this year, a team that Joel Klatt watched and said has some of the worst offensive tape he's seen in the last 4 or 5 years, a team that benched their quarterback in this game. That's why Tennessee is number one on the SEC power rankings going into week 5. Is Oklahoma a better team than Michigan right now? Would anybody say that? And yes, Tennessee has beaten 2 core 4 opponents compared to only 1 for Texas. I guess that's the argument for Tennessee. Even though Tennessee's number 5 in the country right now, Texas is number 1. But NC State, that's not a team with a pulse either. They gotten smacked by Tennessee and Clemson. So, I mean, it's not like NC State is a world beater. And like I said, nobody in their right mind would put Oklahoma over Michigan right now. Like, I don't know if this was for engagement. I don't know if it's because it's a SEC team. I'm not sure what's going on, but there is no legitimate argument based on what we saw for Tennessee to be over Texas right now on the SEC power rankings. And then Tennessee didn't even go in there and beat up on them like that. I mean, they won by 10. I know that Josh Heupel said that he pulled back a little bit because the defense was playing great. But this is a team that was averaging over 50 points a game. They didn't go in there and put 50 on Oklahoma. Like, what did Tennessee do to be above Texas? Beat that weak Oklahoma team? I'm sorry, I don't get it. Y'all can tell me in the comments if I'm tripping. You know what I mean? What did Tennessee do to get put over Texas? Texas won 51-3 and dropped because Tennessee beat Oklahoma? Get out of here, man. I love Gordy to death. Super cool. Love recording with him every week on the big SEC preview on the big show. But man, did he get this wrong. Tennessee did nothing to move ahead of the University of Texas this weekend. Of course, Texas number 2 with the 51-3 victory over ULM in Arch Manning's first start. But, I guess Gordy rocking with Tennessee this week. But, Texas fans, he probably did this for engagement. You know what I'm saying? He got me on the podcast recording, reacting to it like this. I'm sure some Texas fans saw it on Twitter and went crazy. You never know nowadays in this era of journalism. It could have just been to get people pissed off and riled up. They say the best, one of the best traits of like a journalist or a sports broadcaster is invoking emotion. You know what I'm saying? And here I am with emotion invoked. You know what I'm saying? So I guess Gordy did his job. Number 3, Ole Miss. They look like a juggernaut. They just haven't had the schedule to prove it. Now they play Kentucky, tomorrow. They still, Kentucky's not going to help them prove themselves either. But at least it's a SEC team, a really good defense, 6th in the country. So we'll see how Ole Miss looks. But I definitely have no problem with them being number 3 on the list. I think Georgia and Alabama both coming off a bye or, probably interchangeable right now. And, the game will be decided tomorrow night in one of the biggest games of the season thus far. I probably would have Georgia, ahead of ahead of Alabama, which they are, 4 and 5. But we'll see. Obviously, if Alabama can beat Georgia, then they deserve to be ahead of them. If Georgia covers the spread or beats, Alabama, the spread is 2. You know what I mean? But if Georgia beats Alabama, then they're rightfully placed. So I think they're, both of those teams are, interchangeable right now. Georgia had that tough game against Kentucky, only winning by 1. And Alabama has been Alabama, but this is their first real test of the season. So we see what happens. First real game at Alabama for Kalen DeBoer. Then you look at number 6, Missouri. I have question marks about Missouri. I had question marks coming into the season about Missouri, if they were overrated or properly rated or, what this Missouri team could be. Especially after they just squeaked past Vanderbilt, in overtime. You have to wonder how good this Missouri team really is. And I guess we'll see once they get into the meat of their SEC schedule. But I think right now, number 6 is fair in terms of the SEC rankings. Everybody behind them has a loss. Missouri doesn't. So in terms of like the top 5 to 6, still kind of power teams right now in the SEC, Missouri is considered one of those, but probably the worst of the 6. And that's why they're at number 6. LSU hasn't been as impressive as you would hope. They've only lost to, USC, and USC lost to Michigan. So now that loss doesn't look as great, but, the defense hasn't been great. Offense has been, essentially inconsistent, right? You just expect more from this LSU team. A lot of people thought, coming in, LSU could be a sleeper. They certainly don't look like that, but there's still a ton of talent on this LSU team, and they could beat anybody on any given Saturday. So in terms of the teams in the SEC with a loss, I think LSU deserves to be the highest ranked one right now at number 7. South Carolina and Arkansas are both bad losses away from being in completely different conversations. If South Carolina didn't blow a 17-point lead to LSU, they'd be undefeated right now and probably ranked in the country. If Arkansas didn't blow a 14-point lead to Oklahoma State in a game where they outgained them by 300 yards, they'd be 4-0 and ranked, and we'd be having a completely different conversation about those two teams. But they didn't. You got to go out there and play the games and finish the games, and that's why South Carolina is 8 and Arkansas is 9. But like I said, they're a few plays away from being undefeated and being in completely different conversations right now. I think Texas A&M at 10 certainly makes sense. Obviously, got to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback between Marcel Reed and Connor Weigman, if Connor Weigman is even healthy. But I think they're certainly, making the right decision. Gordy made the right decision, I should say, to put them at number 10. And I think that'll be validated tomorrow against Arkansas in Jerry World. I think that Texas A&M will get the victory in that game. But, Arkansas certainly could win. And I don't even think it would be an upset. It's like a 3.5 point spread, maybe up to 4 right now. I still wouldn't consider that an upset, though, if Arkansas beat Texas A&M. Oklahoma's offense is worthy of putting them at number 11. All right. I mean, that is a trash high school looking offense right now. Maybe Michael Hawkins, the true freshman, can revive them and, make them look, competent. But right now, Oklahoma doesn't look like Oklahoma. And, like Joel Klatt said, or not Joel Klatt. Oh, it was Joel Klatt. Maybe, it's really hard to be, really good on both sides of the ball at the same time. Right. So maybe it's just the defensive era, the Brent Venables era for Oklahoma. And they're going to be a team that, tries to beat teams scoring 21 to 24 points. I'm not sure, but they got to figure something out about that offense. Maybe Michael Hawkins is the answer. We'll see with them playing at Auburn tomorrow. I think 12 is high for Auburn. I'd probably put Kentucky ahead of them at 12 and Auburn at 13, but every team behind them as a mess as well. So 12 for Auburn is not crazy, even though, they're 2-2 at this point with losses to Cal and Arkansas, both at home games they probably should have won. Kentucky at 13, they have one of the best defenses in the country, but they did get absolutely smoked by South Carolina. Played Georgia really close, 13-12 game, but they lost 31-3 to South Carolina, so 13 certainly makes sense. Vandy is Vandy, right? They're playing some really good football. I mean, it's good for Vandy not to be number 16 on this list, right? Because I mean, that's where we would all expect them to be, playing some good football. They're still Vanderbilt at the end of the day, 14. And then Florida and Mississippi State are dumpster fires, but Florida beat Mississippi State. So Florida gets to be at 15 and Mississippi State gets to be at 16. So those are my reactions to the Locked On SEC Power Rankings going into week 5. But once again, Tennessee over Texas is absolutely insane at this point. And if your only argument for Tennessee being over Texas is that they beat OU, Oklahoma, when Texas has a win in the big house against Michigan, and I know Michigan didn't look great, but they just beat USC, a ranked team. Like, they're right back in the mix, right back in the mix for possibly a Big Ten championship as a sleeper. You know, everybody's talking about Oregon and Ohio State. What if Michigan runs the table? So, like I said, I don't know if Gordy did that for engagement. I don't know if he was bored. Like, I don't know why he did that. But Tennessee over Texas at this point on any list is insane. Insane. A quick word from our sponsors, and then I give you my 5 somewhat bold predictions as we head into SEC play tomorrow against Mississippi State. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Place your bets today. All right, here we go. Getting you out of here before the weekend. My 5 somewhat bold predictions for the Texas Longhorns tomorrow against the Mississippi State Bulldogs. The first one is Texas records 2 interceptions. Like I said, somewhat bold, right? I didn't say crazy. You know what I'm saying? I didn't say insane. Somewhat bold. True freshman quarterback. You expect them to make some mistakes, right? If this pass defense is what we've seen through the first 4 weeks, if they are who we think they are, they should be able to force a true freshman quarterback into a couple of mistakes. And I think they get their hands on the ball twice in the form of interceptions. This is the Texas defense that has forced a turnover in each game thus far. I think they keep it up. Like I said, true freshman quarterback. They should be able to make some plays in the air. 2 interceptions this Saturday against Mississippi State. That's my first bold prediction. The second one is Jaden Blue goes over 100 yards in consecutive games for the first time in his career. This one isn't spicy at all, right? I fully expect him to get 100 yards. We all should fully expect Jaden Blue to get 100 yards against a team that is allowing 217 plus yards on the game, a game on the ground. But Jaden Blue only has 2 100-yard games in his career, right? Now, he didn't really, step into a full-time role at the University of Texas until last year in, the TCU game or the Iowa State game, after Jonathan Brooks went down with the torn ACL. But, when you look at it, Texas Tech was his first 100-yard game last year. And then the last game against ULM was his second 100-yard game. And so he's never had back-to-back 100-yard games. And I think he accomplishes that against Mississippi State. Like I said, we're going to run the ball early and often. The whole running back room, is on the injury report besides him and Jared Gibson. So I think he gets another 20 to 25 carries. This is just a bad run defense. So I think he pops a couple. I think he goes over 100 yards consecutively once again for the first time in his career. But that's a pretty lukewarm take. You know what I mean? He should get 100 yards. Arch has his first 300-yard passing game. I think the offense is going to be hitting on all cylinders. I think we get over 500 yards of offense. We know that Arch likes to take the deep shots. We saw those the last couple of weeks. I think he connects on a few, but I think he's more efficient. Last week, only 52 completion percentage, only completed 52% of his passes. I think he's going to be upwards of 70% in this game while still hitting on some of those deep shots. And I think in terms of efficiency in the passing game, the wide receivers he's throwing it to, the defense he's going against, their ability to make plays after the catch in terms of yak. I think Arch gets his first 300-yard passing game at home in the SEC opener against Mississippi State. Trey Moore, right? The heralded transfer coming in, 22.5 sacks over the last 2 years, albeit at UTSA. We thought we were getting one of the best edge rushers in the country. And let me, preface this by saying that I know that sacks aren't the end all be all, right? We've seen him get pressure on the quarterback in the first 4 games. We just haven't seen him get home. So my bold prediction is he gets his first sack of the season, right? If I told you, right, you didn't get to watch the first 4 games of the season, I told you Trey Moore did not have a sack after you saw him come over in the offseason, you would say, huh? That's crazy. I think so too. I think he finally gets on the board and gets his first sack tomorrow against Mississippi State. And then the last one, right? I shouldn't have brought this up already, but I wrote it down. The fans starting SEC chant, right? Can we get a 0.5 over under on PrizePicks or FanDuel, whether the fans start a SEC chant? I think they will. Like I said, I think Texas will beat up on Mississippi State so bad with them being an SEC team, even though it's not Georgia, it's not Tennessee, it's not Alabama or Ole Miss. I think we'll still look at them like, this is the conference we were supposed to be afraid of. And I think there will be a couple people sarcastic enough to start an SEC chant. 100,000 people in DKR. It should spread. We'll get the sarcastic SEC chant from the fans in DKR tomorrow. But, if you're going to the game, whoever's at the game, show up, show out, show the SEC what they're going to have to get accustomed to playing against the University of Texas. And like I said, Texas favored by 37.5 points. I think they beat them by close to that or a little bit more than that. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace. Peace.